Guys, my name is Ankush Gaurav and I welcome you to Contour series. So far in the Spring MVC series of tutorials, we went through Spring MVC's introduction and configured Eclipse IDE with all necessary jars. This is the basic setup we performed in the earlier tutorial. We created a project with the name First Spring MVC Project and then added all Spring MVC related jars onto its class path, along with integrating the Tomcat Apache server with it. We are now all set to create our first Spring MVC web application. Alright, let's start. My idea is I'll create an ultra simple web application using Spring MVC, exactly according to this workflow, which I explained in the earlier tutorial. And later, in the subsequent tutorials, I'll gradually make this demo more and more complex by including more and more Spring features in it. This is what I'm going to create. The user will type a URL like this on the browser and hits enter. And my Spring web application will send a response back to the client's browser. The response will be a simple web page displaying a greeting message. Hello user, welcome to our first Spring MVC web application. And while developing this application, I'll cover everything from front controller, handler mapping, controller, till view resolver and the actual view, which you are seeing here in the workflow. Technically, I just need to follow these 4 simple steps to create a basic web application using Spring MVC. The first step here is to modify the web.xml file of your web project, which Eclipse IDE has already generated by default in the web.inf folder of your dynamic web project here. In any web project you develop using servlet technology, you will always need to place a file called web.xml under web.inf folder of your web project. The main purpose of the file is to just map the input URL request to an appropriate servlet which can serve the request. You'll ask here, why am I telling you all this, as you're not going to use servlet technology and will be using Spring MVC for developing this web application? And the answer is, Spring MVC framework is actually using servlet technology as its base. So you'd always need to put the web.xml file in the web project developed using Spring MVC framework. And because you don't want to write servlets and want to use Spring MVC framework, you will need to put up this code in the web.xml file. This code is simply telling servlet technology that all URL requests to the web application should be mapped to Spring MVC framework for further processing. Here, you are specifically telling servlet technology that once you receive any URL request, just map the URL request to something called as the front controller, also called as dispatcher servlet in Spring MVC framework. And after that, the front controller will take the complete responsibility of processing the URL request and sending back the response to the client's browser with the help of all its helpers around it. And that's what I showed you in the diagram here. In order to make front controller work and take charge of controlling the overall application, we will need to provide all relevant information to it in a file called as Spring Dispatcher Servlet.xml. The file too resides inside web.inf folder, and this is nothing but a second step, that is creating the Spring Dispatcher Servlet.xml file in the project. So let's do that. Here, right click, choose new file and give it a name, Spring Dispatcher Servlet. I'll quickly provide all relevant information in this file which the front controller would need to manage this overall application, and later I'll explain the code. You're seeing here 3 sections. Each section is conveying a specific information to the front controller. This section tells front controller which handler mapping to use, whose job is to just scan the input URL and tell the front controller which data generator class to be called for further processing the request. This section is telling which view resolver to use, whose job is to just tell the exact location of the view present in the project. And this section is the controller or the data generator class which you are seeing here in the diagram. Before we further go on explaining individually about all these sections one by one completely, let me write code for third and fourth step too. That is creating the helloController.java class along with the view, that is hellopage.jsp, and later I'll explain it in detail. With this, I'm done with writing complete code for the application using Spring MVC framework. In the next part of the tutorial, we'll learn what exactly I've written in the second, third and fourth steps along with running the application on the Tomcat Apache server. Guys, thank you for liking my tutorials. Please provide your feedback and comments below the video or simply write to me on this ID for all your queries. Please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel Contour series, and I'm going to catch you in my next tutorial.